talk about the business plan, right? Asset management, right? Say for instance, 100 unit apartment, Class B, Dallas. What have been some durations of times in terms of executing the business plan? And you've done a lot of these, so
Mm-hmm.
you being the expert, what's the typical expectation if I'm a new investor? I'm thinking, oh, value add plan for this apartment building in Dallas. What should they expect in terms of timing? You want to share some insights on that?
Depending on the extent of the value add, your first 6 months of takeover are crucial to make sure you manage expectations with contractors, with on-site, with renters, etc. So,
Clint and Melvin Landry, and we welcome you to our podcast, Get Diversified. Throughout these series, we'll cover all the topics and questions you have about investing in apartment buildings, storage facilities, and mobile home parks. Being knowledgeable in these areas will help you feel more comfortable about investing. Apartment investing equals building wealth. Building wealth equals financial freedom. Achieving financial freedom allows you to spend your time with building memories with your loved ones. Let's face it, time is the one element in life that is limited, and you don't.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Get Diversified Podcast. Your host here, Melvin Landry, is here, and I am here with a multifamily superstar operator here. I want to thank you, Miss Sandia, for joining us on our Great Diversified Podcast. How are you doing today?
doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on starting your own podcast.
Yeah, hey. It took a while, but hey, here we are. We're moving and shaking, and hey, we're happy to have a superstar like yourself here on the show. So, Sandia, thanks for joining us. So, to kickstart off our show, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, your journey into real estate, in terms of how things are going so far for you. So, go ahead.
So I'm a mom and a wife living in Dallas for over 32 years. Like most Asian geeks, I have a background in engineering. That's how I started out in terms of my career. I came here with 2 suitcases in hand to this country. $8 a week was my food budget, but I wanted to, become a millionaire and do my own thing. So the first step was education, got electrical engineering degrees. Went to work for a Fortune 500 company, learned a lot of technical things there, but realized that marketing business folks are making most of the decisions. So I got a part-time MBA, thankfully, that my company paid for. That's where my journey into the stock market began. I invested heavily into the stock market full-time after having children. I quit the corporate rat race. It was a stock trader for quite some time. Looked for a way to mitigate my taxes and find a way to do some kind of write-offs. Didn't have that great, brilliant idea like an iPhone or something or iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So went to real estate, stayed away from single family because I just couldn't see the margins. And back then when I was looking at real estate, property values weren't appreciating like crazy in Dallas like they have now in the recent years. So it just didn't make sense to make $200-300 a month at the most on a single family rental and sign a recourse loan, which is why when I heard from a friend about multifamily, it made sense. I didn't have a handy person's background to do fix and flips kind of work. It just seems too tedious. I could easily just analyze stocks and make that kind of money. So I never went into fix and flips, single family, etc. Found a mentoring program like you did that focused on large multifamily. Got my first general partnership deal, 86 doors, for which I found partners from out of state. And that helped me add value to them as the local market expert and boots on the ground. So especially when COVID hit and they couldn't travel, I was the one who was able to visit all those properties and do a lot of the hands-on operations and asset management. And I learned a ton from talking to vendors and being at the property all the time. So that's one of my, shall we say, strengths that I offer to teams is local market knowledge and asset management. And the fact that I live in a neighborhood with 4 of the major brokers in the Dallas area gives me a little bit of a competitive advantage.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that. And asset management, your passion, and that's your life love there, working within asset management. So let's talk about that. Let's think about when you think about asset management for our listeners out there. What are some things? What does it take to be a real good asset manager in your from your viewpoint? If you had to throw out, say, 3 pointers that must-haves.
So first of all, asset management is about executing the business plan. It's like people always spend so much time talking about preparing for that wedding for a whole year or the honeymoon, but they never talk about the marriage afterwards. So that's what asset management is. The deal is closed. Everyone celebrates and posts on social media. Now
Yep.
what? The real work begins now. Now is when you have to execute the business plan and return money to your investors, meet and exceed those initial projections. So asset management is about managing the property manager and finding that delicate balance between not micromanaging your property manager, but at the same time tracking those KPIs, those key performance metrics. And so one of the biggest things I recommend is to have someone who's local and boots on the ground, who knows the property, who knows the area, because I focus a lot on value add multifamily deals, meaning we don't just buy a property, leave it as it is, and keep increasing rents. That's not what we do. We go and update the interiors. We may have some projects on the exteriors, etc., that requires supervision, and therefore being on property on site to meet vendors, to meet when the lender's inspector comes there, when the city inspectors come there, all of that is important because they are your bosses. Your true bosses are the lender, your city inspector, your investors, and then your residents. So when you have to keep all of those people happy. And one of your biggest tools and resources to do that is the people who work at your property. So those relationships are very important. It's a people business. Your on-site staff, they may get paid in the range of 50, 60, 70K kind of salaries, and they are the face, and they can make or break your deal, which is, millions of dollars of investors' money on the line. So very important to keep track of metrics, but don't lose sight of the humans involved in asset management, which is both an art and a science.
Ooh, thanks for sharing that for the listeners. So let's take it a step further. Let's talk about the business plan, right? Asset management, right? Say for instance, 100-unit apartment, Class B, Dallas. What have been some durations of times in terms of executing the business plan? And you've done a lot of these, so you being an expert, what's the typical expectation if I'm a new investor? I'm thinking, value add plan for this apartment building in Dallas. What should they expect in terms of timing? You want to share some insights on that?
Depending on the extent of the value add, your first 6 months of takeover are crucial to make sure you manage expectations with contractors, with on-site, with renters, etc. So simple things like, is the property always maintained tidy? And that depends on your on-site managers issuing lease violations when people leave trash out or something like that. But as far as an investor's perspective on how long it takes to execute a business plan, everything depends on what that plan is. Some of them are light value add. One of our deals, all we wanted to really do was add washer dryer connections, add washers and dryers, implement a Wi-Fi program, and then you can update an interior only when a tenant moves out, and you can go and rehab the unit. So upgrading interiors takes a while because it's based on move-out dates. So that could be a year to 2 years.
Yep.
But all of the other projects, such as exterior paint, well, I'm not going to do it in the heart of winter in Dallas because the weather and temperatures are not going to be suitable, or the rainy season. So sometimes you're just going to wait because it's not the right season to do something. Or let's say I'm going to repair my air conditioners. I'm going to keep my CapEx first, and I'm going to wait till I'm like a month before the summer season when you really need to, and then go and update all of that. So CapEx execution is a good piece of saving money, using it the right way, spending it only on the things you absolutely need, for which the residents appreciate it, and your lender will reward you for it, maybe give you a loan for it. That's a big piece of it. But as a high-level asset management piece, right, you got to watch for your key performance indices. So the most important thing for any apartment complex, any business, is your top-line revenue or your collections, right? It's like the paycheck that's coming in for your household. You need to know that number. So that top-line revenue collection, you need to know that number, but you need to make sure everybody is in agreement on that number, and especially your on-site knows that number. Today, as we're recording this is the 30th of the month. So by now, pretty much your collections for the month of May should be done. So if you're still behind, it's like, go knock on those doors today because we close our books tomorrow. We need to make sure we hit or exceed that number, the target that we have for it. And, you need to make sure every little detail is recorded as to why those payments haven't been made. So top line revenue, always your first KPI. The second one is your operational expenses. What does it take to operate the property, right? That could be your R&M, your maintenance stuff, your contract services, your payroll. Did we have to hire extra people to do some extra work this month? Is that, skewing our numbers? What about my taxes and my insurance? Are we making sure we protest our taxes? Those are some of the non-controllable expenses, right? You still want to make sure you get a tax protest company if you're in a place like Texas. Insurance. Is our insurance coming up for renewal? Should I be getting some additional quotes because my rates are going up? You want to do that about 60 days prior to your insurance expiry. But what about marketing and advertising? Did I spend money on the right channels? Where did my last pieces of traffic come from? Am I spending my advertising dollars on the right places to get the good quality residents that I want? So again, your operational expenses are a combination of all of these different things that I just mentioned. So revenue collections is always number one. Your operational expenses are number two. And you subtract the two, revenue minus operational expenses. It gives you the most important metric, NOI, net operating income. The net operating income is what your lender looks at. It's what your listing broker looks at to determine the value of your property. So let's say that for a Class B 100-door property, as you just said, Melvin, the cap rates ongoing today in Dallas are in the range of, let's say, 5.5 to 6 cap range. The NOI divided by the cap rate is what determines the price or value of your property. That's the price at which you can sell it, or that's the rate at which you can refinance it. So it's a very, very important metric, NOI, which is impacted by your top line revenue collections minus your operating expenses gives you your NOI. Once you've done your NOI, right, and you have, let's say, a floating rate loan, then your mortgage payments is what's going to impact it next. So you want to make sure if you have a floating rate loan that you have what's called a rate cap. So that if the Fed keeps increasing interest rates that they have 10 times so far, you still have a cap which caps the maximum mortgage payment you have to make every month. And then you have what we call as one-time capital expenses. You want to track those capital expenses. If I'm going to replace a refrigerator in an apartment rather than repair it, then it's a capital expense. You want to make sure your property management company is classifying capital expenses as what we call below the line expenses. So the line is where you draw the NOI, net operating income that I explained. Below the line is your capital expense like an appliance, my replacing an air conditioner, doing an interior upgrade where I'm replacing the entire flooring, I'm replacing that bathtub, I am painting the exterior of my building. All of those expenses are one-time expenses that go below the line. And then finally, what you have left over is what we call the net cash. So once you've done your net operating income, you've paid your mortgage, and you have all these other expenses below the line, capital expenses, and you have net cash. You want that net cash to be a positive number because that's your profit. That's the money you take home finally after paying off all the expenses. It's the money that's still left in the bank. And that's the number, that's the amount with which you can make what's called distributions, or what we say dividends in stocks, right? That's what's a distribution kind of like. So you make those distributions to your investors like you projected you could. So sometimes we have a separate budget for that CapEx or capital expenses. So that money doesn't gets pulled from that account, which is separate from the account with which you're going to make your distributions or dividends to investors. So again, the three most important metrics, again, revenue, operating expenses, and net operating income. Those are your top three. After that, you still want to monitor your capital expenses. You want to keep an eye on the mortgage. You want to always make sure you have a rate cap on it. And so you subtract those, then you have net cash. That's my bottom line. Do I have money left over or am I negative? That's not a good thing to be.
That's a good thing.
Next, right? Some of the other metrics that are not exactly financial, but very much closely tied to it are occupancy. Of course, you want to make sure you're fully occupied, right, at the most, but you also want to make sure you're occupied with residents who are paying the rent, which comes to delinquency. Delinquency or economic occupancy is a very important metric. So physical occupancy is I have 100 doors, I have 90 residents living in them, so 90% physical occupancy, 10 units are vacant, 10% vacancy. But if only 85 residents are paying their rent and 5 of them don't pay rent, then I'm down to 85% of economic occupancy. So even though the units are physically occupied, there's 5 people who are not paying their rent. And so my economic, meaning the dollars I'm getting out of it, is down to only 85% rather than the 90%. So that's a number that you want to monitor closely every month. You want to have a plan to address your delinquency. What if tenants don't pay? Is there a plan? So there are sources, there are programs like Lease Lock or Rhino or other forms of security deposits programs that you could use to minimize the impact of delinquency. And a big part of delinquency management is knowing your customers, knowing their household incomes, having a community where people know each other. So doing resident activities is a very big piece of what I do. We have at least some activity every quarter, if not more often than that. We just did a big pool kickoff for Memorial Day weekend. We do National Night Out around that September-October timeframe because we want our residents to know our local police officers. It's fun to bring a fire truck to your community. We have a lot of kids who love to see things like that. And it makes it less intimidating for them to talk to a police officer when there's actually a problem. A lot of them may have language barriers or they may just have cultural differences to where they may not feel comfortable talking to a police officer. And this way they know their neighborhood police officer. So if he's driving around our property or nearby, they wave to him because they know him. Those kind of relationships with your entire community is so important. We also do things like Mother's Day. We handed out a single long stem rose to every mom just to say we appreciate you. We may do a cookout for 4th of July with hot dogs and stuff. We may have a pizza night. We had a Halloween costume contest. We had Santa on property for Christmas, and we had the Easter Bunny out for Easter. So when you do community activities, what it does for you is 2 big things. It establishes a relationship between the residents amongst each other, but also with your on-site, so that when there is a problem, they will come and report. And the good residents will report the bad ones. They'll be like, I'm always smelling weed in that apartment, or they're always making so much noise at night, etc. So you get to know your community well. The second piece of it is, you promote retention because they're like, these people actually care about me. They do fun activities. We're the cool apartment where fun things happen. Get popsicles by the pool, or we hand out, on a Friday, before back to school, we have a nice big bash, or we have a backpack and school supply drive, etc. So we like to be known as that fun and cool community. We like to get good reviews. And more than that, we focus on retention or renewals. So as an asset manager wanting to contain your costs, if you can build a community where people want to stay and they don't mind paying the pro forma rent, market rents, you can retain them because what you save is your turn cost. You don't have to spend as much money cleaning out an apartment. All those days that the apartment is vacant is like the empty seats on a plane that's taken off. You'll never generate that revenue again. For my vacant unit from last week, I'm never going to collect on that, right? Because nobody was occupying it. So it's very important for us to focus on renewals, especially in times like this when we're tightening the belt, tightening the budget, because as you know, inflation is hitting all of us. So it's not just the price of eggs that's gone up. It's also the price of materials you need to do some of your rehabs, right? A refrigerator costs way more today than it did 3 years ago. So we can always look for ways to save money, build a better community by focusing on renewals and retention. So look up the renewals that are coming out 60 days out. Look at how much of a big gap it is to the next rent bump. If it's a matter of only $100 and the resident says they can't pay more than $50 and you're on a bridge loan and the budget is tight, you could just go ahead and say, all right, I'll take you for $50 because in 12 months, what does that amount to? It's $600. It's going to cost you way more than that to turn a unit. And the days it remains vacant, the cleaning fees and just make ready and basic paint and all that is going to cost you more. So, be smart about it. If they are a good paying resident, they don't cause trouble in your property. It's a hassle for them to move as well. This has been their home. So, be smart about those decisions. Don't just say, oh, you must pay this sticker price or else, oh yeah, maybe this is discount season, So you got to think about those things too. So renewals is another very important metric we track. Occupancy, delinquency, renewal rates, those are all very important. Retention, customer satisfaction. Another thing we like to track is work orders. How quickly are we processing work orders? This was the reason I didn't do single family because I don't know how to fix a leaky toilet. That's why we have maintenance staff who's there to fix that. So you want to make sure your maintenance staff is on a good terms with the residents because you're serving them. They are your customers. Don't ever forget that. If it weren't for them living at your properties, you would be out of business.
Business.
So we got to serve them. They're paying the fee that you told them to pay. They're paying the rent. You got to serve them well. And so when you take care of your customers, everything else falls in place so that when there is a problem, right? I'm going to talk about asset management horror stories in one of the upcoming conferences in Charlotte. But in a case where we had gas lines down for a few days, our residents couldn't cook because we had gas stove. And so we ended up buying pizza for them. We gave them gift cards, etc. We did our best to make it a little bit easier on them. And so we had fewer complaints than imagine an entire apartment complex sits and calls your city and city council and gets on the news. You want to avoid those things.
Yeah.
But they knew us as a community. We had an Easter egg hunt there. We had done pizza before for resident appreciation. We'd really cleaned up the property and improved the courtyards. We had done all kinds of amenities and spent money there. So the residents knew that we're not just slumlords. We're actually people who care about the community, want to improve and make it much nicer for the residents. So when you have your customer in mind, when you go into this asset management, rather than just spreadsheets and numbers, you truly improve communities in ways that, the government can't. That is why we get tax benefits from it, because we're doing one of the basic necessities. There's food, there's shelter, right? One of the basic human needs, and we're doing that in a good way. That's why the government gives us incentives, because the government can't do it alone. And if you read Tom Wheelwright's books, he'll tell you that.
That is true. That is true. Thanks for sharing that. A fantastic depiction. As we think about kind of KPIs, right? I know you manage multiple properties, particularly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Is there a target occupancy percentage that you feel good about in terms of where you really want to be and kind of keep it from a steady Eddie standpoint? What's that target percentage in terms of on your KPI board? And also,
the minimum is 90%.
How many? I'm sorry.
The minimum is 90%. Mm-hmm. Your agency loans, everything requires it. We like to be above 95%. So we like to be close to full, 95% plus. And of course, that's a sign that if we continuously keep leasing units and the apartments remain full, it again reinforces the fact that we've picked an excellent location. Because 99% of the reasons people come to an apartment is for its location. It's proximity to their work, their school, something that they need over there. And only then after that, everything else falls in place. So don't ever compromise on location, because it's the one thing you can never change in a property. You can, paint it all you want. You can make it look like a palace on the interiors, but you cannot change its location. You cannot just pick up and move an apartment building. You can do a mobile home park that way, but you can't do that to an apartment building. So never compromise on location. But we strive for 95% plus occupancy. 2 of our properties we acquired last year are both in an area called Irving, which is about 10 minutes from the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. A very, very prominent location, highly sought after, because a lot of new construction is happening in Dallas, and that makes it what we call Class A apartments. So you're newly, college grad with a new job and, earning a nice, 70, 80K plus, maybe 6 figures. They could go live in those brand new apartments. But if we have an older property, a C or a B class property, and our rents are about, $1,800, $1,000 less, there is a workforce housing who needs it. The construction worker, the family with a household income of 50 to 60K, they need a place to live as well. And that's what we provide. So that's never going to go out of style.
That's true. That is true. So Class B, Class C, value add opportunities are your sweet spot, correct?
That's right. And the one big challenge in them is you never know what deferred maintenance issues could come up. So anytime a property is even slightly older, you want to have a lot of cash in hand. That's why I don't recommend spending all your CapEx dollars right away, because you don't know what maintenance issues will come up. You don't know what the lender's audit is going to show up on day one, as well as at the end of the year. Lenders do annual inspections. Your city does annual inspections. Things you might not have noticed. Oh, the stairs are cracked over there. It may not have been cracked on the first day that you inspected it, but somebody could have dropped something. Your parking lot might need repairs. Those are not cheap. Parking lot repairs are quite expensive. Your stair rails may be broken or needing fixing, or the paint could have peeled off on something, etc. Things you may never notice, but your lender, your city inspector, etc. will insist that you do it. They'll give you deadlines to do it, or they'll slap fines on you. So you want to have enough money for it. The second thing is you never know when things could go wrong. So we had this big freeze that happened a couple of years ago in Dallas where 8 days in a row we were below, freezing temperature, which is something Dallas does not know or understand how to deal with. We're not people from Minnesota, so we don't know what to do with it. And surprisingly, I had a 60s property at that time, which we have since sold. And we only had one apartment where the pipes burst, and we had a laundry center where the pipes burst. So our damage control was relatively minimal. We just moved that resident out to another unit, and then we took our time to repair that unit. But I have good friends with nice, much newer, like 20 years newer apartments who had 40 to 50 units down because of it, and they're still recovering from that. That's, it takes a while to repair, get insurance to pay out. You have to put some of your own money, etc. So you can release those units again quickly. You don't know what's trapped between the walls when all of those kind of freezes happen. So I would say that regardless of the vintage of your property, always be cash rich. In some cases where newer properties actually have all these issues with burst pipes, etc., from that Dallas freeze that happened.
Yep.
Most important thing I would recommend is to be cash rich. Always have cash in hand. You don't know what deferred maintenance is coming up, etc.
That's funny. You mentioned the Dallas freeze. When that freeze happened, I was actually living in Dallas. That was Valentine's weekend. So,
Okay.
Yeah, and that was quite a number of being on and off in terms of the heat and things of that nature. So I do remember that time very, very vividly, and quite a different time for Texas, to say the least. So, wow, yeah, thanks for sharing that story. Let's talk about partnership with the property manager, right? How important that is from your viewpoint, and also, have you ever had the opportunity where you needed to change a property manager?
Yes. Property management can make or break your deal. Very important when you select them to make sure you're both aligned in terms of philosophies. Are they okay with you visiting the property as long as you give them notice? Are they okay with you having communications with the on-site? Does your on-site come on your weekly asset management calls, which you should be having? It can be once a month, especially at the time of takeover of the beginning of a new acquisition. You definitely need to have more conversations. Are they fully bought into your business plan? Do they say that, hey, by doing all of these updates to the property, we agree to these rents that you have? So a property management company's budget should match your underwriting and your business plan. And they should be fully aligned with it. They should agree that, yes, we can get you the $25 for reserved parking, or we think we can implement this cable internet package, or we agree that adding washers and dryers will give you a $50 rent bump, whatever that might be. You need to make sure you and them have these long conversations and agree on the budget, agree on the numbers, agree on when you're going to start distributions to investors, because you're going to have this much of profits. That entire conversation needs to be had during that acquisition process before you close the property. But once it happens, you must all agree on the metrics. How are they going to report things to you? When do you expect reports? What kind of reports are they? How strong is their accounting department to do the numbers correctly? And how good is their overall structure and support? How do they have a regional manager who supervises several different property managers? Does the regional manager, are they overloaded? How many new properties do they take on? Because it's a little more heavy up front when you take on one or two new properties. There's a lot more work involved than if it's just at a sustaining level a year into acquisition. You need to have all of those conversations, but on a weekly basis, right? Do they give you what's called a box score or an availability report, right? These are examples of report that we will dive into. I'm starting a new mastermind called ACE Operators Inner Circle, and we'll go in depth into all of these different metrics that you're going to need from your property manager, whether that's on a daily basis, weekly basis, etc. Can you view the bank accounts? You have access to the bank accounts, at least a view access. So you know that when they give you a report saying, oh, we collected $120,000 this month, can you verify it in the bank as a deposit? What kind of accounting do they do? Accrual accounting. What day of the month do you get reports? And how often can you go back and challenge some of the reports? Do you all agree in your philosophies of what's considered a one-time capital expense for the loss that are, in practice there, so that it doesn't impact your net operating income? Those are some of the discussions to be had. And then on an ongoing basis, when capital projects are getting done, your level of supervision. right? If let's just say that you are allowing your property management company to do a lot of your interiors, as an example of a smaller construction project, what is their fee structure? Are you good with that fee structure? How often do you go and walk those units to know if the quality control is there? Is the paint job nice and smooth? Would you like it? I mean, just because the properties that, the residents are paying a little bit less in rent, it doesn't mean the quality of the job is any different than, a fancy, I don't know, A-class apartment. I still want my clean lines along when they paint it. I still want my appliance to be fully in functional condition. It may not be as brand new, maybe, but, and maybe the countertop is not all quartz or granite, but is it neat? Is it tidy? Is it workable? Is it usable? I don't want crooked doorknobs. I don't want things falling off. I want everything to be functional. We have to provide something that's clean, comfortable, and safe. Those are the things we commit to our residents. So is the quality maintained, and can you go supervise it and watch it often enough without getting in their way, right? So at least at the beginning, you may have more touches. And then as you see them executing the way you want to, you might be okay with pictures or something. But the surprise visits are very important. Secret shopping is very important. So I have friends call into the property to verify that what's being communicated is the same as they would communicate with a prospective resident. You also have to do secret shopping personal visits as well. So there's just a whole lot to managing that relationship. But it all comes from having to believe in that relationship so that you nurture it and they do more for you, right? They acquire more. They take on more of your properties that you acquire. And so it's growing their business and yours in the process, because then it makes it easier. But yes, I've had the painful task of having to let go of a property management company. And that's because month after month after month, they would tell us all the right things on calls, but we wouldn't see it reflected in the occupancy, in the collections, or any of the numbers. And our KPIs were being missed. And I give any property management company 6 months. In 6 months from acquisition, if we're not at cruising altitude or having a clear path to that, and we're not aligned in our values, then it's time to let go. And it's time to break up. And the first step in doing that is you've got to get the lender's permission. Remember, the lender is your ultimate boss. They own 70 to 80% of the property, depending on the leverage they gave you. They hold all the cards. So you got to apply it through the process. You've got to make sure you have a second property management company who's given you a great budget, who's going to do a better job, because you don't want to get out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of scenario. So that's the process of going about letting go of a property management company. You want to read your agreement. Some agreements are written for a whole year. So if you want to let them go at the end of 6 months, you still owe them money for the next 6 months. So you might want to reread that agreement and see if maybe you just take on more of certain aspects of it and you agree on rent numbers, but maybe you take on all of the construction side of it. So at least that's going well and on target for what you want to do.
Oh, wow, fantastic delineation in terms of having the right playbook, having alignment across the board, right? Making sure those KPIs are being hit. And if they're not hit, there's a consequence that kind of comes for that at the end of the day, right? Because at the end of the day, you have investors' funds, money to be able to protect at the end of the day. So,
yeah, we have investors' money to protect. We also have accountability to the lender who's loaned the bulk of the money. If we don't meet certain metrics, the lender, we're going to be in forbearance, unable to meet the mortgage payment or anything else. Yeah. The lender requires us to report financials on a quarterly basis, etc. So you've got to meet your conditions to the lender. You've got to maintain a nice property for residents. You don't want to be the one who neglects their property, just like some of the properties we heard about in Houston, and be in the news for the wrong reasons. Right? So all of that ties to property management, good execution. If you executed on the work orders, you wouldn't get so many complaints. Right? If property management was on the ball, you wouldn't have this problem with the city like those Houston deals did. If you met your metrics and made money and had your occupancy high by serving customers well, then you would have the collections to go with it. You wouldn't be in foreclosure. So a lot of things tie together. And that particular property management company went out of business. And back in 2021, when I had them running one of my properties, we had to fire them for that reason, because they just didn't perform. So we had them for less than 6 months and we let them go. They have since gone bankrupt middle of last year. But that was the company that was in charge of all those 4 properties in Houston, which foreclosed recently. And, you can see this. And in fact, when we let go of that company, we had another company who did really well for us for a while. And then they didn't. So we had to let them go. And it was PM3 that ended up, taking over our property middle of last year when we couldn't sell it because of the rising interest rates. So we held it longer. We finally sold it in 2023. But you can't be afraid of change. And when you know instinctively in the back of your mind that this is not the right company, act swiftly. Don't linger. Don't prolong the agony. Don't delay this. Do it quickly, because the bad apple is only going to get more and more rotten the longer it stays in your bag. I'm sorry. And that's exactly it. So when you know it's the wrong company, do not stick around with it.
So not once, but twice you had to make a change.
We have had to fire for one property 2 different PMs, yes. And so it was PM3 that helped us execute and get to the finish line.
Yeah. Wow. Would you say, Sandia, that from a learning perspective, I mean, you have a newfound appreciation for ensuring you find the right partner, ensuring you find the right property manager to help execute that business plan at the end of the day?
Yes. And you know what? The second company that we hired had done a phenomenal job for me at another property. You won't believe this, but in 27 months, we more than tripled our investors' money and returned profits. 27 months. That's 2 years and 3 months. Triple. We did a 3.18x on my first deal with this phenomenal property management company. So, of course, I'm going to hire them. So that's the second property management company I hired. And what happened within 2 months of me hiring them, they lost some key personnel. There was some change of management at the top. People didn't like the newly appointed, person at the head. Good people started leaving, and the company went downhill fast. And unfortunately, there was nothing I could have done to predict that from happening. I could never have known that. So sometimes you have to be prepared to make changes swiftly and be bold about it. Even if it means that the next one may not be as perfect, you know that this existing one is not right. You know that the existing apple is becoming a rotten apple. You got to throw it out and hope that the next apple you get from the tree is a good one. And if not, continue your search. Don't be afraid that the next one could be worse, and then stick with something that you know is bad.
So being prepared as an asset manager, being proactive is key for the greater good of it at the end of the day. Getting those KPIs, improving that net operating of the property. Wow. Fantastic nuggets you've shared. So hopefully all the listeners are kind of listening to the intel, the insights of the parameters of what Sandia, what she looks for, right? The partnership she looks for, and at the end of the day, expectations for success at the overall property. How can people reach you? How can people find you? You want to kind of share in terms of, how folks can reach you, Sandia?
Of course, I would love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. Those are the 2 platforms where I post the most. You'll get a lot of interesting nuggets from my experiences. You can reach me through Melvin, of course. And then my website is engineered-capital.com. Find me on my monthly series, acepassive.com. That's ACE, ACEPASSIV, acepassive.com, where I do a monthly webinar to educate investors. And I'm also starting an inner circle, ACE Operators, that hopefully Melvin and some other great people are going to be a part of, where we'll dive more into the operations to execute on business plans and make our deals more profitable for us all.
All right. Be sure to add those informations to the show notes. And Sandia, one last thing, right? There's a rookie operator coming out, getting into multifamily. You got to give them 2 nuggets of advice, 2 pieces of advice to a new rookie asset manager kind of coming into the multifamily space anywhere in the country. What would be 2 things you tell them?
Partner with someone with experience. Surround yourself with people with the same values who are strong operators, and learn from them. And don't be afraid of making mistakes, but minimize the loss, right? Learn from other people's mistakes and, don't make the same mistake twice. Really be careful about the financial impact that your decisions can make, and trust but verify all your partners, whether that's property management, your construction crew, etc. Trust but verify by being boots on the ground. Remote management may be working for, an empty piece of land, but these are people living in properties, their lives. Learn from the mistakes made by some of the recent foreclosed Houston properties. Boots on the ground, never be over leveraged. You must be your eyes and ears on the property. to not neglect your customers who are your residents and your investors.
Yeah. Wow. You heard it from the expert herself. She gave him some really good golden nuggets in terms of her overall success as being an asset manager and ensuring that you're taking care of your end customer, which are your tenants, right, at the end of the day. So, Sandy, I want to be the first to thank you so much for providing the value that you've brought today to myself as well as our listeners. This is one for the ages here. So asset management is a critical piece of the puzzle in multifamily, and you got to be on top of things in order to garner success at the end of the day. So, Sandy, on behalf of myself, my wife Jackie, and the More Land Equity team, we want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very, very much. And congrats again on launching a podcast. It's a huge step. I applaud you.
Thank you much.